And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 79th episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in-depth analysis and coverage for Indiana University sports to as many fans as possible across a multitude of modern platforms. We are recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, March 12th, 2019, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. And here with me tonight, we finally have all of us back together. My usual co-host, Matthew Lukens, and Nathan Christian. How's it going, both you guys?
Pretty good. What's up, guys?
Doing great.
There we go.
It's nice to have us all back.
It is. It's been, I think, about a month or so. But have you ever wondered when we record these shows? Ever wondered how you can join the group chat if you wanted to watch this when we record it live? Catch us Tuesday evenings at 8:30 p.m. on our YouTube page or right on our website. If you miss us for the live broadcast, you can subscribe to our show for free wherever you listen to podcasts, so you can listen on your own time. Check out our Twitter and Facebook at the Hoosier Sound and at Indiana HQ, respectively, and subscribe. All of the information is in our website, indianahq.com. All right, Hoosier Nation, it is time for some sports talk. On the docket for tonight, Indiana, of course, won their fourth straight game to close out the regular season this past Sunday on Senior Day against Rutgers, and they keep their tournament hopes alive. We're going to very briefly, talk about what we saw in the game before moving into the Big Ten tournament this week and how that basically gets Indiana, could or could not get Indiana into the big dance itself. So let's start with Matt. What were your knee-jerk reactions, overall thoughts, Juwan Morgan leaving Senior Day type of reactions from Sunday's win against Rutgers?
Well, personally, for me, it was a bit somber, as it's the last time as a student, hopefully last time as a student that I will be in Assembly Hall. The two circumstances where I could be back is one, I fail my classes and I'm back next year, or two, we're in the NIT, which I don't think either of those anybody wants to happen. So it was my last game there in Assembly Hall in the stupid band vest with my saxophone, getting to watch Juwan Morgan. It was Juwan Morgan's last game as well, senior night, of course. Zach McRoberts, Quentin, Johnny Yeager, and Zach McRoberts. I think I just mentioned Zach McRoberts twice. Evan Fitzner. All the seniors, senior night. So it was nice. It was nice to get a win. It was the most comfortable IU win we've had in probably 3 months. I would consider the argument the Illinois game was maybe a slight bit more comfortable than this one, but I felt like every time Juwan Morgan was on the floor, we were going to go up by another 5 points. And he had that look in his eye that he was just going to score, and nobody was going to stop him. There was some dumb foul calls all over the place, really, because how do you go calling 4 fouls in the first 9 minutes and then call 40 over the next 31? So some ridiculous stat like that. So yeah, there was some dumb foul calls all over the place. So it wasn't just on IU, but especially on Juwan, just some ticky-tack fouls that kept him from playing 30 minutes, and he only played 20 minutes. But knee-jerk reaction, great win. The team looked great. Romeo had a rough game shooting, but still scored 20 points because he got to the free throw line. And if we're going to succeed in March, we're going to need Romeo to hit his free throws, and he was stellar this past game.
How about you, Nathan?
Yeah, Matt, you were absolutely right. You talk about comfort as far as the win goes. Is IU's first double-digit win, or this previous week, had IU's first double-digit win since December 22nd. Make no mistake about it, guys. As crazy as it sounds, this IU team is now kind of the dangerous team in the Big Ten tournament and maybe the NCAA tournament. The Hoosiers control the game from start to finish, both against Illinois and against Rutgers. And I just, I want to get something off my chest here. Look, I haven't been on this podcast in a couple of weeks, and I remember us when IU was in the middle of its annoying, almost just devastating losing streak. Look, I feel like all three of us, when we were here, we preached patience. We said that because of a combination of reasons, even though IU did lose 12 out of 13, we said because of a combination of a tough schedule and some injuries and some bad luck here and there, that because of how good the Big Ten is, IU could turn this around. And we didn't take shots at Archie Miller calling for his head. We didn't say that these players don't care about IU basketball and that the fan base is apathetic. No, look, for all of you out there, here's the deal. If you want to hear people spit truth and not be irrational or angry or over the top about things, you spend 1 hour a week with us and then spend the rest of your time with your wives and your girlfriends and your friends and your brothers and sisters, because we know what we're talking about. So great week for IU basketball. And look, this team, as crazy as it sounds, they lost 12 out of 13. But right now, while the Big Ten has worn down so many other teams, it looks like IU's got the second wind. And, heck, maybe everything goes up in flames on Thursday, but they played really well against both Illinois on the road and Rutgers.
Well, Nathan knows what he's talking about. I, on the other hand, pretend like I know what I'm talking about. So you take that as you will, podcast listeners. Anyway, Noah, take it away.
I just love Nathan's rant because I forgot the last time Nathan was on the podcast was when Indiana was still losing.
Yes.
So Nathan has had all this built up frustration that he's been waiting to get out and just try and say. And honestly, now that I think about it, Nathan, we shouldn't have had you on the podcast.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Wait, who let him back on the podcast?
You shouldn't have had him on the podcast. So
we'll see how it goes. But I was just annoyed. Like, there are reputable, normally sensible journalists and media members who just they completely lost. They called IU a dumpster fire, and they said Archie couldn't coach, and they made judgments based off of press conferences. But it was evident that this team was good enough if they just got some guys back and if they just straightened things out, the schedule was going to get easier. Now look.
Yeah. And yeah. Except now that I do think about it, Galen Clavio is taking one for the team. Right now he's in some other country. And if you don't remember, Galen, who was a guest on our show, by the way, which was a great time. Every time he's been gone, Indiana has had a big win. The big win against Marquette earlier this year, the win against, I think it was Michigan State this year. So he has done his due diligence and left the country. So Nathan might have to leave the podcast a few minutes early. So if he does leave, then that's the reason why. So we need as much help as we can get. We don't want to jinx anything or leave anything to chance. But yeah, and I think I loved what both of you guys said throughout everything. And I think not that anyone overlooks this, but I think it's senior day. It's Juwan Morgan. It's the time to remember all the kind of stuff he's done, the kind of stuff he's been through, how you heard a lot of guys thank Crean. And first and foremost, I have to agree with them. Crean did a great job recruiting some of these guys and believing in them and starting to get Juwan Morgan to where he could get to be where he was. Because without him, of course, Juwan didn't explode until Archie officially was here, but Archie didn't do all of that within a span of a couple months over the summer break. So Archie, great job getting some of these great senior guys in, even some of those guys on the bench, like Johnny. You hear people talk about Johnny off the court. He's a guy that really helps keep this team together with just his demeanor and everything. And I bet he goes really hard in practice. But anyway, Juwan Morgan, a guy from his freshman year winning the Big Ten tournament to his sophomore year, getting injured and having his shoulder blown out to where he can't play a bunch of the season. And then last year where he exploded, but the team wasn't good. And then this year, his senior ride and everything, he's been through a lot. And if you look at these freshmen, of course, your seniors are supposed to be more of those mentors to some of those younger kids and those leaders. But if you really listen to how people like Rob Finnessy and Race Thompson talk about Juwan Morgan, they absolutely love him. When Juwan talked about being Uncle J-Mo on the post-game senior day speeches, these kids really love Juwan Morgan. They really look up to him. They take everything he says, and they really see him as as much of a father figure as you can be with only that couple years of age difference. They love everything he says. These freshmen wouldn't be growing like they are without the kind of person Juwan is, just the kind of good, nature heart, nice guy, the kind of person he is. And just a shout out to Juwan before we move on to the Big Ten and the NCAA, because there's not going to be much of a chance to talk more about him. Whenever Indiana stops playing basketball, I think we'll talk a little more about him in depth, but just a hats off kind of moment to Juwan. I know you wanted to say something, Nathan.
Yeah, no, it's a good, all those were good points there. No, over at Indiana HQ after that Wisconsin game, we had boots on the ground at Assembly Hall that night. And for those who may not remember, I'm sure all of you do, but that IU Wisconsin game was kind of back and forth. It was a close one that went down to the wire. At Indiana HQ, we were able to capture a really nice moment as Wisconsin turned it over on that last possession to help IU win the game. Juwan and Race Thompson, remember, Morgan had fouled out earlier in that game, so he was on the bench. Race Thompson ran over to Juwan Morgan, and those two guys shared like a real nice embrace after that game ended. And it was completely true. It was completely real. Nothing fake, nothing fabricated. And you could tell like Race Thompson was proud that he was on the court to help IU win that game, and Juwan was just as proud of him. So, that was really nice to see, and it really echoed all the things that you mentioned.
Yeah, it's definitely no surprise that Indiana came out and won the way they did against Rutgers, because not only Juwan, of course, he came out 10 for 10 balls to the wall kind of thing, but the rest of the team also played like they weren't going to let Juwan down on his specific day, even if it was against Rutgers. It didn't have to be against Michigan State or Michigan or Purdue or some bigger team necessarily. They were going to show that for Juwan that they were going to win, keep the NCAA tournament hopes alive, and all of that. But let's move on so we can actually talk about the NCAA tournament, because as this podcast is called Tourney Chances, we talked about this last week. Indiana has done everything it needed to at the very last second to come in and have hope to get into the NCAA tournament. And everyone is wondering, can they actually continue to do all of this on a 4-game win streak? I think we all agree that it needs to be 5. But before we get there, every week we do who won the week. And I think it's important also to look at all of some of the other teams and how some of the other sports programs are going. So Nathan, we'll put away the IU basketball side of it. Who else won the week? Because of course, Indiana basketball, 2 more wins. So of course they're, I think, the team that won the most. But after them, who won the week this past week for IU sports?
Yeah, it's funny because I think the guy I'm going to go with isn't a current IU athlete. It's former offensive lineman Roger Saffold. Now, he was a football player at IU a few years ago, and I know offensive line's not a glamorous position, but Saffold is one of the few IU players recently, and there have been some, but he's one of the few guys that has really been kind of a mainstay in the NFL. He was with the Rams last year when they made the Super Bowl, and he's been with the Rams for a while. But earlier today, Roger Saffold signed a 4-year, $44 million contract with Tennessee. Colts fans who are listening, you'll see him protecting Marcus Mariota in your division the next few years. I think it was like $18 or $19 million guaranteed. So, yeah, I think Roger Saffold, I think he won the week as NFL free agency kind of kicked off. I guess technically legal tampering period kicked off yesterday. So shout out to Roger Saffold. Also to the women's tennis team. They knocked off Illinois for the first time since 2008. So impressive performance by them as well.
Yep, number 31. Illinois. So, and again, to echo Roger Saffold, if you don't know anything about NFL contracts and offensive lineman contracts, that's a big contract. Yes. That's some guaranteed money, especially for an offensive lineman. But moving on, NCAA tournament, what we're all here for, what the title of the podcast is. All right, the Hoosiers at literally the very last second, I think a loss to Wisconsin would have done them in, but the Hoosiers did what they needed to do in order to not pick up their 15th loss on the season before the Big Ten tournament. This makes sure that IU will have at least only 15 losses at worst on the season before going into the big dance, potentially. This ties the most losses that a team has had and has gotten an at-large bid Last year, it was Alabama, and the year before that was with Vanderbilt. So it has happened before. No team has ever gotten 16, so IU at least does not fall into that category, unlike another team we might talk about a little later. But now that the NCAA tournament picture is just a little clearer than it was a week ago when Matt and I talked about Indiana going dancing, I think it's obvious, or at least the obvious answer to IU getting in the tournament is that they at least have to win against Ohio State. Win, and you have a decent shot at getting in, depending on how the other teams play. Win against Michigan State, I can't necessarily call it a lock, but I personally think that they would have just a really, really good chance at getting in if the Hoosiers can make it to this Saturday in the Big Ten tournament. Nathan, since you weren't here last week, what are your thoughts on what Indiana specifically needs to do to get themselves in before we talk about potentially other help?
Yeah, so first of all, I loved your guys' breakdown last week. I was listening while I was slogging away at work, getting tax returns out the door. It's that time of the year. But, IU's got a pretty good argument right now, you guys. And I don't want to be stubborn or arrogant, but the fact that they have gotten the big wins, they've avoided the quadrant 3 and 4 losses. They've had good wins in the beginning of the season and the end of the season. They play in a really tough conference. When I combine all these things and I compare them to other resumes that IU's fighting against, personally, I think as long as IU avoids a bad loss, I'm talking a double-digit loss to Ohio State, I think they're okay. But look, like you mentioned, Noah, if they win, personally, I think that solidifies their case. But who knows? It's the selection committee. Every year, it feels like they have a different sort of agenda that they want to push. Who knows? But I liked what Archie Miller said the most after IU's win on Sunday. If we keep winning, we'll be all right.
And before I kick over to Matt, this is, remember, the first year, officially the first year of the net rankings. So Indiana could be already in comfortably for the committee. They could be extremely far out. We just technically don't have any idea. Of course, all the bracketologists know a little bit more, but I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana was comparatively at least, a really high seed or pretty far out, just because it's the very first year that the net rankings are officially here. Matt, what about you? What do you think Indiana specifically has to do themselves before we look at what kind of help they could get?
They got to win. I think I'm just going to reiterate what everybody's already said, but basically they have to win this Ohio State game. And then I feel like they can lose the Michigan State game, but it's got to be in a very dramatic way. Like, it's got to be a close, tough loss with Nick Ward coming back for the Spartans. And, it's got to be like a buzzer beater for Michigan State. And then maybe we have like a 50% chance of getting in. So we definitely need to win against Ohio State, get some help, and then have a good showing against Michigan State. It would be really nice to beat Michigan State a third time, because I'm going to disagree with you, Noah, and say if we beat Michigan State for a third time, I think we're a lock. I think we get to 18 wins, or was it 19 wins if we beat Michigan State? 19 wins. I think we're a lock.
No, I basically said, too, that I think it's as close of a lock as you can get without officially knowing, I guess, is what the committee's going to do.
Well, I'm going to say we're a lock if we beat Michigan State a third time. So,
yeah. Okay, Nathan, you talked about losing to Ohio State. Is there any scenario, I'll start with you first and then go to Matt. Is there any scenario, in your opinion? Now, I'll preface this, though, quickly. This is all of our opinions. None of us are bracketologists. None of us are on the committee. This is just us observing what we have observed, and it's just us kind of talking basketball. So this is no inside information. This is us. We could be completely wrong. As Matt said, he likes to pretend he knows what he does. I think I follow the same. Nathan follows the same. So take it with a grain of salt. But Nathan, if they lose to Ohio State, let's say even if it's a close loss, is there a scenario that you think Indiana can get into the tournament with a loss on Thursday?
I think so. I do. And I don't think I'm being a homer here. I don't think I'm being biased here. Look, at the end of the day, and I just pulled this straight from the NCAA website, they pull the following criteria to determine who makes the tournament. Okay. Look, we talked about the net rankings, right? That's the first year we're including that. IU grades out very well in quadrant 1 with the number of wins that they have. And I think just as important, 0 quadrant 3 or 4 losses. But the committee also looks at things like non-conference strength of schedule and overall strength of schedule. This is a year where the Big Ten is hands down unanimously the toughest conference in college basketball. And IU, and Archie Miller deserves credit for this, instead of scheduling a bunch of easy teams in the non-conference part, like NC State did, a fellow bubble contender, IU voluntarily put Louisville and Arkansas on their schedule. And that's before we even get to the fact that the Big East ACC, the Big Ten ACC Challenge pitted IU against Duke, and the Gavitt Games pitted IU against Marquette. The fact that they went out and they put Louisville and Arkansas on their schedule, and also Butler as part of the Crossroads Classic, that to me, I think is going to look really good in the committee's eyes. IU's got a bunch of quality wins. IU has, they also do consider player and coach availability. Obviously, IU's had some injuries as well. So based on the criteria that I'm seeing on the NCAA website here, I do think IU has a chance as long as they keep it close against Ohio State. In fact, I'll predict even if with a close loss to Ohio State, I think IU will get in even then.
Nice. All right. I at least hope that I and agree. But going before I kick it over to Matt, because I think he has a different opinion on it. You were talking about the criteria for Indiana, just looking at injuries, looking at just their entire season in general. I'm going to kick it over. I'm probably going to sprinkle in some of these Twitter questions. Dustin on Twitter, speaking of criteria, IU's confidence seems to be soaring right now. How much does recency affect selection committee's decisions on the NCAA tournament spot? So we talked about injuries, the losing streak, all of that extra stuff. How much do you think the committee factors in that Indiana's on a 4-game win streak at the moment?
I think they factor that in slightly, but they're also going to factor in the fact that we lost 12 of 13 games. So they're going to weigh each other out, right? Like, because we're going to talk about Texas in a minute, because Texas is one of those cases where it's kind of like, well, how are they in the tournament and we're not? But I think the reason Texas is in it over us is because Texas didn't lose 12 of 13 games, right? They spaced the losses out. They have some bad games here and there, but then they win a game here, have a 2-game winning streak there. Like, we had a rough patch, and these last 4 games have been great, but I don't think the committee can trust us yet. And that is why I think we have to win against Ohio State on Thursday, because they get back Caleb Wesson, their best player. They beat us in Assembly Hall this year already. If we can go back, avenge their loss, look like the different team from the team that was playing them back when we played them in February, I think we'll be in, or at least have a very good shot of getting in. But, like a 5-game winning streak, beating a team that we'd already lost to earlier in the year, that's what the committee is looking for. If we lose, I think it's going to be a hard sell for us to get in, just because I don't think Rutgers is as good right now as they have been. I don't think Illinois is as good as they have been the whole season. I think they're both having down part of the end of the season. Michigan State hit a rough patch when we played them twice. And Wisconsin has been a little bit up and down. So that's what the committee is going to look at and go, well, you won 4 games in a row, but they were all kind of iffy wins. Like the teams you were playing while they were decent, were having rough patches. And we still don't know if we can trust you. And so that's this Ohio State win, knowing that we have to win this game. If we win it, I think that, it gives us a very good chance of at least getting in a play-in game. So
playing devil's advocate, at least for the Illinois and Rutgers game, margin of victory does matter, I think, because if they would have won those closely, I think it'd be a little less impressive. But winning double digits for the first time in however long, I think definitely matters. Now,
that's like Yeah, we won by double digits, but they've both been like not playing as well as they were in February and late January. Like both those teams in late January and early February were giant killers, right? Like Rutgers beat Michigan, right? They beat Michigan, right? And then Maryland, and then Illinois beat Michigan State. They were giant killers. They're going out and beating teams that were slightly better than them. And I don't think they've been playing as well as they were back in early February and late January. So even though we won by double digits, I think that's more to the point that they weren't playing as well as they have been. But
the one thing though, guys, is that, as far as, look, I'm just going off what I've seen here that the NCAA has put out. Timing technically doesn't matter. All they see at the end of the day is who you beat, when you beat them, and by how much. Or on the other side, who'd you lose to, and by how much there as well. So the timing of it doesn't really matter. So you're right, Matt, in that the committee does very possibly need to trust IU better, and make no mistake about it, a comprehensive win over Ohio State would absolutely help IU's cause. But I just wanted to point out that, technically if a team goes on a 5-game winning streak at the end of the year, that doesn't really make their case any better than if they had a 5-game winning streak at the beginning of the year. Now, maybe human nature kind of gets involved, and maybe that's kind of a tiebreaker sort of subconsciously in the selection committee's mind. But as far as at the end of the day, it's what's your overall resume look like? Who'd you beat and by how much? Or who'd you lose to?
Yeah. Let's get into it. So Indiana wins on Thursday. We're going to go with that scenario. I know what Nathan thinks. And I'm actually kick it over to you, is there a scenario in which you think Indiana does not get into the tournament if they get a win on Thursday? I'm going to ask Nathan because I know what he thinks will happen, but do you think there's a scenario in which they don't get in?
Nope.
What about you, Matt?
I think yes. I think it's like a 75-25% chance that if we beat Ohio State pretty comprehensively, that we're in. The 25% chance is that something crazy happens in all the other conference tournaments, and we get some bid thieves.
Bingo.
And we're on the outside looking in. So that's why I stated that beating Michigan State a third time would definitely lock us in the tournament, because that would push us ahead of not only Ohio State, which after beating them would push us ahead of them, but then that would also probably push us ahead of Iowa or one of the lower end tournament teams in the Big Ten. And that kind of like puts us up the pecking order. Like teams like NC State and Clemson, we will talk about, I'm sure, here in a minute. But that will put us just above them that win against Michigan State. So 75-25.
I have a question for you guys. Are you excited that IU gets a third shot or third chance to beat Michigan State on Friday, or would you have rather had a chance to play Michigan or Purdue again?
I would have rather had a chance to play Purdue. I think that Purdue is very beatable right now, like extremely beatable. I would not be surprised if they lose in the first round of the tournament. I'm just going to put that out.
The NCAA tournament?
Not the NCAA tournament, the Big Ten tournament.
Oh,
NCAA tournament, I feel like they're, with a good enough seeding, I think they're a second weekend team. But no, I just feel like this Big Ten tournament is going to be so deep. Who are they playing? Who would be their first round matchup? Penn State or Minnesota? Yeah, they're losing that game. I'm gonna put that one out there. I just think Purdue's very beatable right now. I would have rather played Purdue than Michigan State a third time, especially with Nick Ward coming back. Of course, we lost to Purdue on a BS tip-in. When we weren't even playing that well yet. Like, we have definitely improved since we played them in like the last 3 weeks. We're a completely different team now. So I would like a second shot at them, or a third shot at them, Yeah,
and it would have been nice just to get not a bigger resume just because beating Michigan State, being the number 1 team in the Big Ten, is definitely not something to put aside. But it would also have been nice to be like, oh, they beat Michigan State twice, they beat Wisconsin, and they beat, like Matt said, Purdue or something, just to add an extra team, even though technically that is the best team in the Big Ten. I guess it just, at first listen, that's even a bad way of saying it, but just at first glance, it's like, oh, they beat more teams instead of just one team 3 times. Now, definitely if they beat Ohio State, I still think in terms of like net rankings and all that kind of stuff, that's probably the biggest win, but whatever. Definitely doesn't matter just because we won't see anyone else unless we get to Saturday or Sunday. But to what I at least put earlier, winning on Thursday, I think I agree with Matt. I think there's a very, very good chance Indiana gets in unless there are a bunch of bid thieves, like Penn State ends up winning the Big Ten tournament or something. Some team in all of those major conferences wins the tournament, steals a bid, including other mid-major to lower level conferences that we'll talk about in a second. But like if Gonzaga loses tonight, which if you're listening to this tomorrow, you already know the answer, or if the Mountain West, Big East, MAC, Pac-12, and Atlantic 10 are a couple of conferences that I saw that only one team really needs to win. So that's the only way that I can see it. Is there a way? I know Nathan's answer. Is there a way that Indiana does not get in after beating Michigan State? Nope.
Not at all.
A lot of nice dead air. What about you, Matt?
Yes, there is. And it's what you just talked about. It's that Penn State somehow goes on and wins the Big Ten tournament because Penn State is playing out of their mind right now. And I know I said if we win, we're a lock. And that's because the chance that Penn State goes and wins the Big Ten tournament is like 0.1%. But they're still playing fantastic basketball. If Penn State goes and wins the Big Ten tournament, which would be the nightmare scenario for us, trust me. If Penn State goes, they steal the bid away from us that would have gone to us, after beating Michigan State. Now, I'm prefacing this as in we lose the next game after Michigan State. So I think we play, if we beat Michigan State, we play the winner of Wisconsin and probably Maryland versus Rutgers. So probably Wisconsin versus Maryland. So we play the winner of that. And I'm just prefacing that we lose after that, even though we made Saturday that we lose. I'm just going to say that if Penn State or Minnesota or Iowa or Illinois goes on to win the Big Ten tournament, I think we're on the outside looking in. And so is Ohio State that after we beat them. But that'd be a nightmare scenario for us.
I think it's a nightmare scenario. And then Matt went a little in depth with the Big Ten tournament, but I think it's really all of those teams, like every single bubble team we're going to mention ends up that Indiana needs to lose ends up winning or something. I think that's the only way. But when you get to 19-15, like Matt said, assuming you lose on Saturday, 19-15, that's the record that Alabama and Vanderbilt technically had going into Selection Sunday. And I know Indiana had a better record than Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt was a 9 seed 2 years ago. Alabama, you could definitely argue which resume is better. But again, Alabama was a 9 seed. Right now we're talking about IU getting into the NCAA tournament.
Alabama did make the SEC tournament final, though. And that is why they got in.
True. They got it as a 9 seed, though. That's what I meant, as a 9 seed, not barely. Yeah. They got in pretty comfortably. So yes. I definitely want Indiana to win at least through Friday, not to get in, but to get out of the play-in games. I don't want them to play an extra game next week. It would probably mess up our show next Tuesday because, of course, it would probably end up being when we have always record these podcasts because that's how this season is gone.
Yep.
Next week, we have Andy Bottoms coming on to talk about some bracketology, so I don't want to mess that up. I don't want to play on Wednesday. Let's just wait till Thursday and Friday to play, and let's just get in and not get in those play-in games.
Yeah, I think that's a good point you made. Vanderbilt example you gave, I think, look, and again, I'm not a fly in the wall of the selection committee in the selection committee meeting room. I have a feeling IU's going to end up grading out a lot better than even the bracketology community feels right now. I just think at the end of the day, it's going to be hard to keep out a team that has, multiple wins over Michigan State, Wisconsin, Marquette, Louisville. I'm sure I'm missing a couple there, but I wouldn't be surprised if not only they get in, but they do avoid that play-in game like you were talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we can agree. I can see a scenario where Indiana gets in with losing on Thursday. I don't think it's likely, but I can see the scenario. I don't think it's likely again, but I can see it. I think Thursday with the win, I think they have a good chance of getting in. Granted that they have a little bit of help, not too much, but some help. I think a win on Saturday, definitely. And if they get some help, they can get out of those play-in games. So what help are we talking about before we get into the help? Look at that little small teaser. Remember, Keon Brooks is announcing this Friday. I think a lot of us have forgotten about Keon Brooks actually deciding to announce his decision in the middle of everything. I think he just picked a date for himself and not realizing it's right before the NCAA tournament, the middle of the Big Ten tournament, the SEC tournament for all of the teams that he's still in. But anyway, Friday, 8:00 p.m., which he will still be on the Eastern time zone. So that'll be Eastern time zone, St. Paul Lutheran's Church. So if you're up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, go see that. I don't think there's much reason for us to talk about where he's going. I think we've mentioned it. Other people have mentioned it. No one really knows where he's going. If you see someone come out with something, they're just speculating what they might have heard from their family, what they might have heard from him. There's arguments to where, of course, everyone's going to be happy if you get a 5-star in-state recruit, but there's also arguments to where the team will still be okay if they don't get him. So Matt said that he's going to do an extra emergency podcast if he ends up picking Indiana. So we'll see where that goes. Matt, are you still willing to do that?
Yes, I am willing to do an emergency podcast if he commits, but
we'll put something out extra there, even if it's like a 20-minute or something thing, just how he does. So in all of this Big Ten stuff, remember that Friday night after IU potentially plays Michigan State earlier that day, check Twitter. Make sure that you can see where Keon Brooks ends up going. But wherever he goes, we wish him the best of luck. All right. Help. IU. I think let's at least go with the scenario that they win Thursday, lose Friday. So they need more help than if they were to win on Friday against Michigan State. So they need a little help just to make sure that they can solidify their chances at getting into the NCAA tournament. They beat Ohio State. They lose to Michigan State on Sunday. This is where Indiana needs to be. There are obviously a few, more than a few teams that are on the bubble. But I think the one that we wanted to talk about the most is, and I think Matt has an answer for this, but you look at a team called Texas, a team that right now, unless they win the entire Big 12 tournament, will have 16 losses on the season and will be the first team to have 16 losses and try and get into the tournament with an at-large bid. And of course, if they have 15 losses winning the Big 12 tournament, they're already in anyway, so that part wouldn't matter. Texas right now, at the time of recording, before their game against Kansas on Thursday at 9:00 p.m., is 16-15. They're 16-15. Remember, Indiana's 17-14 at the time. So, Matt, why is Texas not only still in the discussion? They're definitely now on the bubble, but why are they still in most people's brackets as a 16-15 team?
So they have some very good wins. There's some very, very good wins. One win that IU doesn't have is Texas has a win over Purdue. In fact, they beat Purdue in the first week of the season. Or not week of the season, first month of the season. They also beat UNC in the first month of the season. And they beat Arkansas. So they beat Purdue and Arkansas, two teams that IU's lost to. They beat UNC, who's a top 5 team in the country. They lost to Michigan State by a little bit. They beat Kansas State. They've beaten Kansas. But they've also lost to teams like TCU and Georgia and Kansas and Oklahoma State. So while they have some great wins, they also have some terrible losses. So they're just kind of an up and down crazy team. They have a loss to Providence. And they've won. Let me see. I'm trying to count in my head right now. They've won one of their last 5 games. So they're going into the tournament 1 of 5, the last win being against Iowa State on March 2nd. Of course, they played Texas Tech and TCU afterwards, but they got swept in the season by TCU. The reason they're in is because they have those fantastic wins earlier in the season. UNC win was looking okay until UNC turned it on, and now they're a top 5 team. The Purdue win looked decent, but Purdue was 6-5 at the time when they played, or Purdue was 6-5 at one point, and now Purdue's turned it on. So those early season wins look fantastic, but as the season has gone on, Texas hasn't been the same team. With occasional outbursts beating Kansas State, who won the Big 12 with Texas Tech, and beating Kansas. So that's why they're in the tournament. Now, if they lose to Kansas this next game, which I think they will, if they lose to Kansas, I don't think they make it in at all. They have to beat Kansas. So you're going to root for the Jayhawks in this next game, because they're not going to make it in with 16 losses. If the 16th loss doesn't come to Kansas, if they beat Kansas, I think they still have a very good shot of getting in even with 16 losses. But if they lose to Kansas and that's their 16th loss, they're not making it in. And it looks like Nathan has something to say. So
no, it's all good. I just I don't remember if you talked about it. Did you mention that they also lost to Radford in their non-conference schedule? Okay, you did mention that. Okay, so that's a quad 3. Oh, well, anyway, to reiterate or iterate, they lost to Radford, which is a quad 3 loss at home, so that's another thing. But one of the things I noticed, I keep bringing this up, but this list of criteria the NCAA has released for their selection, one of them is Vector metrics, which is a very ambiguous term, and it's very 2019 of the selection committee to get with the times. But I'm assuming one is KenPom, and something that is going for Texas that maybe isn't going as much for a team like IU or a team or a mid-major bubble team like Belmont is the KenPom rating. Texas right now in KenPom is number 27 in the country, and this is something that's a rating that's better than Marquette, for example, a rating that's Syracuse. So Texas does have that going for them. That's another notch in their belt, so to say, that might get them in versus knock them out. But one thing I will say is, for those listening, keep in touch, keep track of our cheering guide on Indiana HQ. Something that we will have on there is rooting for Kansas over Texas. That's going to be an important result for IU basketball fans across America. So when that game goes on in the Big 12 tournament, make sure you root for the Jayhawks.
I'm just going to say it. I'm mad that Texas is still in a lot of discussions. 16-15, that's just, you're barely over 500. I understand why they have good wins, but they also have bad losses, something that Indiana doesn't have. So I'm mad that Texas still is in a lot of discussion. And thankfully, look at Andy Bottoms's bracket. He finishes in the top 10 regularly. We're going to have him on the show next week, pending Indiana doesn't have a game on Tuesday evening. And he put Indiana above Texas. He finally took Texas out. Their other teams, he has other teams considered, but basically his first 4 out kind of things. But let's go on to summarize. Go Jayhawks Thursday. Twitter question. We're going to get into Ohio State next. A Twitter question. Jed, this is a great question. A win over Ohio State puts us both, so Indiana and Ohio State, at 18-14 for the season. On the conference record, this win puts Indiana at 9-12 and Ohio State at 8-13. So how can they, the bracketologists, NCAA committee people, how can they say Ohio State is already in? Nathan, do you want to take this question?
Absolutely. It is a really good question, like you mentioned, Noah. And one resource that I like to use a lot this time of year is bracketmatrix.com. It basically compiles all the bracketology, summaries, all the bracket predictions across America. There are 138 of them. And here's the deal. Ohio State is, they're, according to this compilation of brackets across cyberspace, they're the last team in, and Indiana's the first team out. So that's what's on the line Thursday. it's going to be really interesting to see what the committee wants to push. And I've mentioned this once or twice, but here's the deal. If the committee wants to emphasize, I guess, just consistently winning games, Ohio State will be their team. Ohio State's got 5 road wins as well, which is more than IU. And at the end of the day, Ohio State has, they've knocked off a team like Cincinnati on the road. Now, what's going to be interesting to me is if the selection committee dives in deeper than just Q1 or Q2 wins. And what I mean by that is, look, quadrant 1 is a pretty wide range. It's a home win against a top 30 team, a neutral win over a top 50 team, or a road win over a top 75 team. Ohio State has 4 quad 1 wins. But the best one is on the road against number 27 Cincinnati. So when you dig in deeper and you see that IU's knocked off Michigan State twice and IU's defeated Louisville, at some point, don't those quality Q1 wins outweigh Ohio? It's going to be up for the committee to decide. But look, make no mistake about it. Thursday's game has a lot riding on it.
Agreed. Let's go into another Twitter question that talks about specific teams. So, Matt, I'll shoot it this way so you can answer real quick. Sudden on Twitter, the Pac-12 is probably the worst Power 5 conference this year, and I'm almost positive fans of mid-major bubble teams are hoping to face Arizona State in round 1. Why is Arizona State even considered as somewhat of a lock in such a weak conference?
That's because Arizona State has a couple decent wins. I can't remember their non-conference wins. That's slipping my mind right now. Kansas. Yeah, there we go. Yes. Bobby Hurley. Is it Bobby Hurley? Yeah, it's Bobby Hurley, right? One of the Hurley brothers is Kansas's Achilles heel, because I think these last 2 years that they've won, they have an interesting player in Lugans Dort, who is a lot of fun to watch. They play an interesting brand of basketball. And so that is why they're in. Also, they're raking up some wins in the Pac-12 because the Pac-12 is trash. So that is why they're being considered for an at-large bid. Will they get it? Probably not, because the Pac-12 is trash, and they only deserve Washington to get in. But then again, Washington could go and lose in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament. And then we have a bid thief. So there you go.
Yeah, and they don't really have any good wins. And if you look, if you're not as familiar with the net rankings, I'll put it in terms of AP poll rankings, because that gives you at least somewhat of an idea. They beat Kansas when Kansas was ranked 1st in the country. They beat Mississippi State when they were ranked 15th in the country. Now, of course, those change because that's what the net takes into consideration, but those are their only 2 top caliber quality wins. Before, even if you even talk about, they did beat Arizona, which is a team that's up there, but they lost to Nevada, and they lost to like Princeton and Stanford and USC. So they've got some bad losses as well.
To be honest, the Nevada loss is not a bad loss.
Oh no! I didn't mean that loss. The other ones were. Nevada was a it's okay to lose to Nevada. Let's go into. Who does Arizona State play this week?
It's to be decided right now.
Who will they play? Like which 2 teams?
Let's see. Reading the Arizona Central right now. The game between UCLA and Stanford, so there's a pretty good chance they play UCLA. Now that I said that, they're going to play Stanford, though.
Yeah.
So,
which they lost to earlier in the year. But anyway, root against Arizona State. There's a team to root against. You got Texas, Ohio State, obviously. Arizona State. All right. Are there? I'm going to mention teams that we need to lose: St. John's, Florida, Temple, NC State / Clemson, TCU, Creighton, Belmont, Georgetown, Alabama, St. Mary's. Are there any teams? Nathan, pick one team that you want to talk about specifically.
Can we do Belmont? You mentioned Belmont.
Yeah,
I want to talk about them for a second.
There you go.
So, that's a team that right now a lot of people are sort of feeling sorry for. They had a really nice, they had a really nice season. Look, in their defense, they went 25-5. They lost to a really good Murray State team in the Ohio Valley Conference Tournament final. Look, it's tough, no question about it. Here's what bothers me about Belmont. Okay, as a mid-major team, I understand the argument that, look, they don't have too many opportunities to schedule games against great D1 powerhouses. Okay, like IU did play Duke. IU was able to face Marquette and Louisville and Butler and so on. Belmont's real big ticket regular season game was at Purdue, a game where Belmont was very competitive, and they deserve credit for that. But to me, where IU's resume smokes Belmont's out of the water, and I understand Belmont, 25-5. Even if you're not going to be able to schedule those games against great teams, at least take care of business against the quadrant 3 and 4 opponents. And Belmont lost at home to Jacksonville State. They lost on the road to a Green Bay team that ranks number 220 in net ranking. To me, with Belmont losing that OVC title game to Murray State, I think they're out. And I will say, I can't wait to watch Ja Morant do his thing in the NCAA tournament for Murray State starting next week.
Yes, we deserved a Ja Morant in the NCAA tournament.
In terms of Indiana and Bubble Watch, we needed Belmont to win because Murray State was farther out of the bubble than Belmont was. But I agree for that, both of those comments that we want to see in play. Belmont, the only caveat is that Belmont is done playing, so Belmont's resume it's sealed. So the NCAA is going to obviously take that in consideration. They can't lose anymore. They also can't win anymore. But Matt, is there one of those teams that you would like to talk about before we start to wrap it up a little bit?
Sure. Georgetown. Georgetown's fun to watch. They're a pretty fun team. Of course, Mac McClung, high school dunking sensation. He's actually a pretty good shooter for them. Has had a decent year. Of course, Patrick Ewing is their head coach. And James Akinjo, former IU recruit, just like Lugens Dort, is killing it at Georgetown. So they're a fun team to watch. Got some great freshman guards, but they've been really inconsistent. But that being said, so is the Big East. The Big East has been wildly inconsistent. I mean, look at our buddies Marquette, right? Marquette was a top 10 team at one point. Now they've lost 3 games in the last month, and they're looking on the outside, looking in. Villanova, gets destroyed by 30 at home, then goes and looks like they've revived their season, and then doesn't win the conference. And it's just a weird set of circumstances. And, from one game, they look like national title contenders, to another game, they look like they might not make it out of the first round of the Big East tournament. So the Big East is crazy. But that being said, Georgetown is actually very inconsistent, and hopefully they get very inconsistent during their tournament. And that's all I have to say about Georgetown.
Yeah, the Big East is a big question mark in terms of bubble teams. There are a lot of Big East bubble teams. I'm going to quickly go over some of the bubble teams and when they play. I'm going to have Indiana HQ is going to have all of this wrapped up on Twitter. We're putting out what teams to look for that day and who to win and who to lose. I'm also going to put all of this stuff that we just specifically talked about in the podcast article. So if you forget, hey, Noah mentioned this team at this point, when do they play? When do we need them to lose? Just check out, go to the website, click on the article. I'm going to have it all written out there. Texas, like we said, plays Kansas at 9:00. These are all teams that we are rooting against. St. John's, a Big East team, plays DePaul tomorrow, which will be Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Florida plays Arkansas on Thursday at 1. Temple will play Wichita State or East Carolina on Friday at 6:00 p.m., which is a big game. Temple definitely needs to lose. They're one of those closer bubble teams. NC State and Clemson, they are both 2 teams that are on the bubble. They will play tomorrow, which is Wednesday at 12:00 p.m. There's arguments both for and against. We were kind of chatting about this in the back rooms more. I think a lot of us were more hoping that Clemson will pull out a victory, but I think it's almost the same scenario as Indiana, Ohio State. One team wins, they have, in more or less terms, one team wins, they have a chance at making it. One team loses, they're kind of out. It's not that simple, but as close to that as it gets. TCU, big team. Oklahoma State tomorrow, Wednesday at 7:00 p.m. All of these teams, keep in mind, we need them to lose the first game. Indiana needs them to lose the very first game. Any games after that, they start to get into why they should be into the tournament ranking up against Indiana. Ohio State, of course. Creighton plays Xavier on Thursday at 2:30. Georgetown, we just talked about that. Alabama plays Seton Hall Thursday at 9:30 p.m. I'd rather have Seton Hall win against Alabama, even though Seton Hall is a sort of bubble-ish team. I'd rather have them beat Alabama because Alabama is on the other side of the bubble team. But I could see debate either way. Now, those are all the bubble teams. We talked about bid thieves. The conference now, of course, like we talked about, you can't have a team like Penn State or Rutgers or any of those teams that are not in the bubble in the NCAA tournament discussion themselves. You can't have them win, so you can't have any extra teams. So, of course, the Big Ten, there's a better chance that someone in the NCAA tournament already will win. Those conferences that we have one, maybe two teams that need to win without getting a bid thief that we've talked about. Gonzaga's playing right now, tomorrow, or no, later this week. The Mountain West will play. Indiana needs Nevada to win at first. Now, if Utah State wins their very first game, I think Utah State is kind of comfortably into the tournament right now. If Utah State wins that first game, start rooting for Utah State. Just put them into the tournament so that there's no other bid thief in the Mountain West. Big East, this is a big one. All of those teams we mentioned need to lose, and I think Villanova, Marquette are the only two teams that right now need to get into the NCAA tournament and win the Big East tournament. The MAC, only team, Buffalo. Buffalo needs to get their win there. Talked a little bit about the Pac-12, Washington. Definitely Washington. No other Pac-12 bids. That's going to be the scary conference to watch out for. Really look at the Pac-12 and Washington. Atlantic 10, another one. Surprisingly, the Atlantic 10, root for VCU. VCU is already into the tournament in every bracket as a 7, 8, 9 seed. Root for VCU. No one else is there. Get VCU into the tournament.
Let's go Havoc defense.
Exactly. All right, those are the conference tournament wins. Check it out if you forgot. I know that's a lot of information, but man, the next few days are going to be critical. So update your phones, look at score checks, get notifications. I know the ESPN app, you can do specific game notifications. Make sure you have all that going so Indiana can get all the help they can get. Let's finish up real quick with a couple other questions that came through. First, we had a question come through on the YouTube chat. Nathan with a quick answer. Santosh, I think I said that correct. Does Jordan Howard start the year as a Bear?
I don't think he does. The Bears have seemed to make running back a priority. They signed Mike Davis earlier in the week from Seattle. So Howard, who played at IU, I know we all remember him. I think he's going to be somewhere else next year, and I wonder if maybe the Colts are a possibility.
Gotcha. All right. Mike from Twitter, bench production has been better over the last few games. Your thoughts on why? Is it as simple as the guys are just playing better, or is there something schematically / stylistically to attribute to the better play? Matt, you want to give a more brief answer on why the bench production has been better?
Confidence and familiarity. Playing in practice together on a second unit like Duran and Devontae have, they have a very good chemistry together playing against the first team, who's very good at defense, by the way. So they're going to be very good on offense because they're going up against very good defense every day in practice. So the fact that we've been healthy and now we have an actually full roster to have a full practice team, there's better team chemistry, and you can see it when the second unit guys come in. They have really good chemistry together.
Yeah. This is where the injuries really come to help. The lack of injuries, fixing the injuries, come to really help the team the most, not just on the court, but in the practices and getting better, like Matt just said. All right, Nathan Blake from Twitter, is Morgan the type of player that can single-handedly carry Indiana in the NCAA tournament, assuming they get in, obviously?
I don't think So, I mean, Juwan Morgan, we've talked about him earlier tonight. He's a really good basketball player, no doubt about it. But in the Big Ten tournament, you're talking about a lot of long, athletic front courts. Really, Juwan Morgan's best game of the year came against Butler, and, he was really able to wreak havoc inside, whether it's Ohio State or Michigan State or another team on Saturday or Sunday. I think it's going to be too difficult for him to do it by himself, but he doesn't need to. As IU has shown the last couple of weeks, they're getting contributions from different sources, and that's what's led to their success.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, in some ways, but not single-handedly. He definitely needs some extra help. And I mean, you've got a 5-star recruit like Romeo Langford that's going to be able to help step up. And if they get into there, I don't think the stage is going to be too big for Romeo. But that's a question for next week if we talk about it. Let's go to our last one. And I like this question. Rob from Twitter, not including Indiana, what other team has the biggest chance to win the Big Ten tournament from seeds 8 to 14? And just as a reminder, those 8 to 14, 8 is Ohio State. Of course, Indiana's 9, Penn State 10, Illinois 11, Rutgers 12, Nebraska 13, Northwestern 14. The very easy. What's the easy answer, Nathan?
Penn State.
Matt, what's the easy answer?
Penn State.
Is there another team besides the obvious, very hot Penn State team? Is there another team that you could see besides Indiana and Penn State? Is there another team you could see as a dark horse, Matt?
This was 8 through 14.
8 through 14, Ohio State on down.
Because I was going to say Minnesota.
Nope.
No.
What about you, Nathan?
I think Nebraska has an outside shot. I love James Palmer Jr., Glenn Watson. They've got some guys that can score. If they catch fire, I think they could really make a run.
Ooh, hot take button, big hot take button.
No,
yeah.
Not going to happen.
Bad Nebraska struggling, to say the least, at least in the Big Ten. I'm going to say if there was another team besides Penn State, just Ohio State, just because they're the best team. And
it's besides Penn State and us, right?
Yes, that's what I mean. So so really I think Ohio State's the only other team that would have even a shot, and I don't even think they really have a shot at getting a little past Michigan State or Saturday if they even get to that specific spot. But they're not going to, because they're going to lose to Indiana. So Ohio State has a 0% chance of getting in.
You better knock on wood right now there, sir.
Right there.
I'm going to be yelling at you guys. I'm going to be yelling at you guys when Nebraska shows up on Saturday.
Hey, if Indiana loses, remember it's Nathan's fault. We're going to leave on that note because he did the podcast today. All right, guys, that about wraps it up for our 79th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate your support. I'm going to be back this Friday for another edition of the Hoosier Sound Off, which will, of course, include a lot of updates on how everything's going through Thursday with the Bubble Watch. Make sure to check us next week with our guest, Andy Bottoms, pending that Indiana does not play and everything works out. So check us out then, because Andy gives a lot of great information. We're going to do a bracket ourselves like we did last year. Who is the Hoosier Sound bracket that's going to end up winning? Make sure to stay tuned through updates on Twitter at the Hoosier Sound. Subscribe to us on YouTube or however you listen to podcasts. You can visit our website at indianahq.com so you can get all that in just one place. Thank you to our live audience for coming out, participating in the ongoing chat, and we got a question through the chat. It's always great to get those there. As always, send us your questions as the audience. You can comment, chat, send us a message at admin@indianahq.com, our email address, and what questions you have, and we'll get them on our next episode. Lastly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. Your support really helps us grow this podcast so that we can reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
Hopefully I'll see you on Friday.